You see little pieces of coal all the way there. See 'em?
So mining has always been a very important aspect of the industrial, economic, and social development of the state. And Carbon County was a very central part of that.
Once you get a little bit of the coal under your nails, it's hard to give up. Came out to Utah to work in the coal mines. I'm also attending school for a mine engineering degree. It's almost like being a part of the first resource that provides for so many things.
You know, Carbon County at one time had the cleanest, best coal in the world, you know, and it, to my knowledge, still probably does.
That coal in that region over there, when I say Sunnyside and I go clear over to Cascade, incredible coal. The Brass Tuck coal, the Willow Creek coal, the Castle Gate coal. The problem with that whole region is it's tougher to get. So you can't mine as fast. But that whole region, it's got incredible, great coal.
It was actually the engineers of the DNRG that discovered large tracts of coal. And they'd write back, buy up this land because there's coal on it.
Castle Gate was really important because it was right on the main line of the railroad. The coal companies were subsidiaries of the railroad. Castle Gate was right in the center, so people were going through there all the time.
As that was happening, there was a push happening out of Southern and Eastern Europe of peoples.
They did a lot of recruiting throughout Europe. You had Italians, you had Greeks, you had Yugoslavians, you had Japanese. So it was just a large variety of immigrants.
This mining was changing the industrial aspects of Utah, but also changing the social and ethnic constructs.
You know, they wanted individuals who are hardworking, that kind of knew what they were doing.
My great-grandmother Helen, her older brothers came to the United States in search of coal mining jobs because they were all coal miners back in Scotland. And the Littlejohn brothers ended up in Castle Gate. There were a lot of different nationalities. And from my understanding, everybody sort of lived in their own area of town.
They tried to keep nationalities separate. You know, they didn't want them mingling too much, you know, talking about the hardships of mining and what they could do to put themselves in better situations in the event that there was a disaster. These were communities that were separated by a nationality, but they were close.
When the men were down in the mines, it didn't matter, you know, skin color or nationality because they were all in it together.
I have ancestors that worked in the Castlegate mine. Henry Eugene, he was a teamster and a hoist man. They would carry the cars up and down in the mines. And then he also was a teamster and worked with the horses and the mules and that, bringing the coal out of the mine.
The animals that were used in the underground mines were donkeys, mules, horses. Most of these animals were blind. They never got to see the light of day. These animals would transport the coal on wooden carts from the areas where these men were working to the surface. So whatever they could take out is what they were paid for. So it was really tough manual labor that these men did.
They weren't people with a lot of extra income or extra money. They were trying to survive, and it provided a good lifestyle for them. They started their family there. And so I just had the impression from my father that it was a difficult existence in life, and yet they found joy and happiness somehow with their families and everything else there.
My name's Cheryl Barney. I was born in a little town in southern Utah named Castle Gate. It was a great community to grow in the heart of Carbon County.
It was a really nice place to live. They had the amusement hall that ran movies. I think it was in the dance hall. They had a gazebo downtown where the local band would play, and they had baseball and football. They had a hospital. So even though it's all crammed into this, this little canyon, there was a lot going on there. It was a real sort of hub of activity.
When the miners all came out of the mine, they would ride the mine cars to the bathhouse, and they had rows and rows and rows of showers. We loved to go out there and turn on 50 or so many percent of these showers, and it was the greatest slide in the world. My dad had a little weigh shack, and it was right side of the company store. And I loved to go down and sit in the little weigh shack with my dad. He had a potbelly stove in there, and in the winter, the guys on the tipple crew liked to come up and sit in the weigh shack and get warm. It was the only place they could go to get out of the weather.
On March 1st, due to a lack of coal production, they closed the number 1. And so they took all the most experienced miners and married men and moved them over to the number 2. The single men that were working at that time, they let them go. They laid them off. And so there was a lot of anger about that, but little did they know that, being laid off saved their lives.
Castle Gate number 2 mine this was the 3rd shift of men to come into the mine in March. So there's not a lot of activity going on there, and that's, I think, one of the reasons for the buildup of the coal dust.
Your ventilation was terrible. And when you don't have ventilation, when you're in there, whether you're dynamiting the coal out, you're picking, shoveling the coal out, whatever you're doing, you're producing coal dust. Coal dust is like gunpowder.
Yeah, the Castle Gate mine has some of the most explosive, dangerous dust in the world. It just kind of created the perfect storm. Most of the men were working in the D seam. And so when the day shift came in, there was a fire boss and 2 loaders that went into an area.
In room number 2, in the 6th left dip, they had just shut down coal the night before. So there was a mound of coal that the fire boss was checking for methane.
There was so much of it that it blew his flame out.
When he crouched down to relight the lamp, apparently he must have pulled some methane down with him. And when he relit the safety lamp, there was this ball of flame that filled the ceiling. The flames went through the whole 6th left dip and down the main haulage way.
The blast goes down into the mine. It becomes less and less as it goes further down the mine, to the point that it just becomes a wind when it reaches the miners way down inside the mine and blows out their lamp.
Now it was pitch black in the mine. This explosion had raised up a cloud of coal dust.
You had a large amount of sediment and dust and debris that was pushed deep into the mine. And so Utah having the most explosive dust, you know, that just created this big powder keg.
And somewhere in the mine, one of the men must have lit a match and
when the secondary explosion hit, the force was even stronger than the first.
All of the miners were killed immediately in the explosion.
There were rescue teams from all over the county that came in there. They had to go in, they had to remove coal, they had to remove timbers. I mean, it was a very exhausting process and dangerous process too.
We had a day shift, a night shift. They had rooms that were set up for the safety equipment, for the apparatuses.
The men wore these, they were 40-pound tanks, these oxygen tanks on their backs, and they had these big tubes across their mouths where they wore a mouthpiece and a nose clip and goggles, so that way they wouldn't, you know, accidentally inhale through their nose. And with their mouthpiece in, that's where they would get oxygen. So they would go in search of bodies, bring them out to the fresh air base, and make copious notes about exactly where they found the body, what condition it was in, and then call up.
They had a room that was set off to the side, which was basically a makeshift morgue where the bodies were brought out. When you went underground at that time, there was a tag that you had a number, and you would put that tag on that board, and that's how they would track, you know, who was underground and who was working at that time. But the blast was so significant, that board was completely destroyed. So they had no idea how many men were actually underground until they started retrieving the bodies. This was a very disastrous event. There was 172 men that had just died. 117 of the men that perished were married. There were 417 children that were left fatherless.
The families were able to apply for disaster relief. And so they sent Annie Palmer, this social worker, to town to have all of the widows fill out a form and tell your name, your debts, all of your personal information. They would then receive a check.
If we look at the work of that relief committee, very well organized, very systematic. It tried to be absolutely fair and document everything that they did.
She was able to help not only in just giving them money, but help them so that they could make a living, so that they could actually function, so that they could continue to live.
It's not just what happened in 1924 and after. It has a lasting effect. For the families and for the relatives, it's part of their history.
I think it's really important that we don't ever forget what our ancestors experienced.
Those were some pretty smart, ambitious, hard-working people. There's more They're just names on a page. These are people with lives and families and emotions. And I am just absolutely amazed at what those people accomplished.
You don't really die until somebody says your name for the last time.